Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel, Blockchain versus the Surveillance State. My name is Laura Shin. I'm a crypto journalist covering crypto, as I just said, and blockchain technology. And during the press conference preceding this panel, we had an impassioned discussion around whether there's a moral equivalency between imperfect democracies and dictatorships. And as an American whose ancestors come from North Korea, I would definitely say that there is not a moral equivalency. However, you will hear in this discussion that we do talk about the dangers and potentials within this technology to combat overreaches of both governments and corporations. And I also wanted to echo Galia's sentiments earlier that I'm so honored to be speaking and exploring the ramifications of this technology here in front of people who are fighting for freedom. I hope that through this panel you will learn not only about the potential for these technologies to do good, but also for the dangers that they hold within them, because as you can see from the speeches before, that it is a double-edged sword. And so one note before we begin, which is that you can tweet questions at us. We're not going to be taking questions here in the room, but you can tweet questions, and when you pose your question, just tag @OsloFF so that we can see your tweet and know that it's directed for this panel. And without further ado, we will begin with our four speakers, Ryan, Arthur, Galia, and Stephen. So before we began this discussion, I actually read a book by Dave Eggers. It was made into a movie called The Circle, and that depicts a dystopian society. I'll just briefly describe it for those of you who did not get to either read the book or see the movie, but it depicts a company in this dystopian world where essentially it's a company that has aspects of what we would recognize as Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Amazon, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, Spotify. I try to write them all down. Apple Health, Fitbit, and many others that I probably didn't even notice, the credit score companies. And something that was interesting is that before the panel, I'd been thinking like, oh, this is kind of this sci-fi world. But another question that I was going to pose to the audience was about WeChat in China. And eventually it dawned on me that actually WeChat is probably not that dissimilar from this company, because what happens in the book is that this starts out as a private company, but eventually by the end it sort of merges with the state. And it becomes obviously quite creepy. But here we are in this situation where we do have a company like WeChat. It is a company, but it is very close with the Chinese government. It does allow the government to censor and surveil the transactions of the users on the platform. So a question that I wanted to pose for you guys was how you believe blockchain technology could be used to either combat or prevent situations like what we're seeing now with WeChat, or in this dystopian future depicted in The Circle.
I actually think that blockchain technology can completely enable that future if used in the wrong way. So I don't think the blockchain technology is necessarily a solution. I think it's very much on the design of the system. And examples of this is the crypto ruble from China, which is being designed by the guys who built Kiri, which essentially is Russia's response to Visa, MasterCard. Essentially, Russia saw built out Kiri and sponsored that company to face the existential threat of the US shutting down Visa or MasterCard. Essentially, the future is not necessarily physical war, it's economic war, it's crypto war. And so that system includes blockchain components, but it has like very strict KYC, very strict tracking of information. And then you see some cell phone companies integrating blockchain technology into the chips, which if done in the right way is great, it's really helpful. And if done in the wrong way, then that links your location to your payment information, to your identity, et cetera, and it's stored in the blockchain. So it's very much how you design the system.
Yeah, so let's draw that out a little bit further, because as you guys saw from the presentations, blockchains are immutable ledgers of transactions, and so done in the wrong way, it can actually create a situation where data that you may not want about you will be permanently recorded somewhere. So how can you design a system in a way that is, good and is kind of in line with what all the goals of a conference like this are about, and then what are the ways in which it could be designed where it could be used for nefarious purposes?
So I'll jump in and say that maybe on the positive side around this technology, and Ryan mentioned it as well, which is that once you reduce the technical barriers to entry and you let folks use these tools, it's in many ways like a point of no return. So for example, one of the strongest ways that nefarious governments, and also let's call them regular governments, use to control the people is they control the money, right? If they freeze your bank account, if they put sanctions on your nation, this is one of the most accessible ways to control the behavior of another, is to restrict their money supply so that they can't operate within society. If you allow folks to create new money supplies, you can circumvent a lot of that pressure. Think of the example of Greece. Greece finds itself in a financial crisis where all the euros are leaving Greece. All the people are still in Greece, all the factories are still in Greece, all the needs and wants are still in Greece, but the money is gone. And so the country's at a standstill and the people really suffer. If the people, or anyone amongst the people, could create a currency and have obviously the network effect and the credibility and the immutable ledger and the trust in that currency to kind of jumpstart commerce, even locally, it could serve as a bridge until bigger solutions are found, until the euros return to the country, and all of the other things. So I think the answer to the question is not how do we design the perfect system, and I don't think any technologist or company or advocate or activist can design the perfect system. I think the idea is to design a decentralized system that constantly lets new entrants access it and build new tools and build new solutions and keep it open.
Yeah, building off of what Galia said, we were just at this conference a couple weeks ago called Consensus, which is this kind of industry conference for the blockchain industry. There was pretty incredible there. I was just thinking of the graph that you put up that showed the long tail of all the different currencies and crypto projects. There are literally thousands of companies in this industry that are building different blockchains, cryptocurrencies, applications, protocols and services. So that's, I think, if you look at that, there's an entire industry that's been created with companies that are companies and individuals that are all around the world. You know, there's actually no single central location where it's centered. That's really important because there's like a point at which, you know, it becomes so large and pervasive that it's like you can't put that back in the box. And we have to make sure that we focus more on, I think, like building industries and building like competition into the system, as opposed to like relying upon single individual corporations like Signal, you know, that even they can be censored and shut down. Even they can be targeted. We need to strive for entire industries really taking a technology and allowing it to pervade all of the professionals around the world, so that it just becomes part of our fabric. And I think, you know, I'll just make another comment. I think there are certain technologies that, you know, any technology can be used for good or for bad, but I think there's certain technologies that lend themselves either more on the side of consolidating power or more on the side of distributing power. You know, you look at like one very famous one is gunpowder, right? And the gun that was, you know, often referred to as the great equalizer, partly because it really shifted the dynamics of warfare and really helped create the distribution of power, a very important thing. And so I do think that while there are some perils of blockchain technology, it's very similar to gunpowder in that it can distribute, you know, if we actually approach it the right way, and that it can distribute power to people around the world and give them increased access, especially through things like the ability to choose your own software and the ability to fork a system.
Yeah, I think those are all really important points, but I actually want to circle back a little bit to what Galia was saying, because we had a question come in on Twitter earlier about the Petro, which is a cryptocurrency that was created by Chavez in Venezuela, and it's supposedly backed by the value of the oil reserves there in Venezuela. However, I think most people in the crypto world at least view this as an example of kind of a nefarious actor trying to use this technology in a way that probably doesn't further the ideals that are generally within this community. And one of the Oslo Freedom Forum members who is from Venezuela told me that there was a point in 2007 where they basically lopped off 3 zeros from the currency. So if you had 1,000 bolivars, suddenly it was 1. And since then, hyperinflation has taken off, and she said that at one point it was, something like 1,000 bolivars to $1, and now it's 883,000 on the black market, she said, but the official rate is 80,000. So hyperinflation is actually something that a lot of people in the blockchain and crypto asset community discuss. So can you talk a little bit about how you think that this technology can help fight that?
I'll say that the technology is always part of the problem and part of the solution. What's beautiful coming from a software background is that software allows us to program ideas into the application. So, I would leave it to the economists in a room, or to the mathematicians in a room, or to the social anthropologists in a room to suggest ways that we can combat inflation in currency. And there are many, many ideas out there. For example, demurrage. Demurrage is a negative interest. So it basically says that currency expires over time, meaning that if you hold it, you lose it. And so the way to get the most benefit, or the bang for your buck, is to spend it and to pass it on, and that's what money is essentially made to do, is to spend and not to hold. So it's just one example, and demurrage can be very easily programmed into a cryptocurrency, and so can many other monetary policies. So I think the bigger frame that I see really is the access to the tools and letting folks try their ideas and program them into currencies and run pilots and see what happens, and also kind of having the empathy as a collective for the process we need to go through. I think someone mentioned it in the press conference, which was you don't go from dictatorship to democracy in kind of one step, right? There's a process there around education, transparency, conflict resolution, compromise, different things that contribute to a healthy democracy. And the same with this, right? You don't go from national currencies and the regime that we've been under of national currencies and this economic slavery that many people can point to. You don't go from that to, great, anyone can make a currency, it's going to be amazing, in one fell swoop. There's a process, there's a lot of learning to be had, and as long as we open up the tools to everyone to try, we'll be kind of getting the best ideas and learnings from the entire population.
And how do we prevent things like the petro, or just deal with them, or what do you make of the petro? That was the question from Twitter that I wanted to mention. Somebody from Venezuela was asking, what you guys think of that.
I think one really cool thing is, I think that a lot of people don't fully appreciate, is that you can take when you move these currencies to a blockchain system, they're now part of this decentralized database that can be just forked. Someone can copy the database, create a new version, and then they can change anything about it. That means that governments could, of course, take money away from individual citizens. At the same time, the citizens could collectively take money away from the government. You could actually imagine that if the citizens have the ability to coordinate together, they can just delete the balance of the government, and then now the government can't pay the military, and now the government can't actually enforce anything, so the military just leaves, and then they turn on the dictator. So I think there are actually, now it's obviously very difficult, but it changes money into an idea. And if everyone can agree upon the same idea, then everyone can change the reality.
I would say also you have to look at the, like the gunpowder, you have to look at the balance of things. Anything you do can be used by anyone. If you can find a way to increase crop yields, and all of a sudden, some dictatorships has lower costs for feeding their army. That's this type of things happen. And so yeah, it's possible that states like Venezuela might decide to issue their cryptocurrencies, but you have to look on the balance. Are cryptocurrencies something that is making the dictatorship in Venezuela better off or worse off? And I think the balance is clearly worse off, because it prevents their ability. I think maybe not enough today, because these technologies are fairly new, but in the long run, this is a type of technology that will prevent them from just basically stealing their entire population's money by debasing the currency. So, on the balance, it makes them far less powerful.
And I also wanted to ask you, I know that your grandfather has an interesting story from Nazi Germany, and I feel like that story if you can tell it, but then also relate it to your thoughts on
Oh,
blockchain.
yeah, yeah.
And
I mean, so it's an interesting story. I mean, it's many people's story. My grandfather in France was sent to the camps in Germany, and fortunately he survived. In the same time, the rest of my family was fleeing through France. But just a more general lesson is, a very popular instrument in Jewish culture is a violin as opposed to the piano, because it's much easier to take a violin with you in the pogroms than a grand piano. And likewise, you see a lot of lawyers and doctors among the Jews. My grandfather was a doctor, and one of the reasons you become a doctor or a lawyer is because you're building capital that you can keep in your head. Right? Because if you're trying to build up capital by being a landowner and you get expropriated, that doesn't work so well. And cryptocurrencies is the first time that you can actually hold value in your head that's more liquid than just a doctor's training or a law degree. So I think that's something that's really, really new and fairly interesting. And again, when my family fled to avoid the camps, they were breaking the law.
wow. So I also actually wanted to discuss Stephen's project, because when I talked with Stephen before this panel, he mentioned that he is an ethicist on staff, and I wanted to ask you kind of what are the questions that you guys pose, and then when you make decisions about how to design your protocol, how do you make those decisions?
Carefully. Yes, it's we're very conscious of the that choice I was talking about, the sort of existential choice between full control and essentially anonymity. And when you build a system that has the capability to give people a complete shield from censorship and surveillance, you have to carefully think through the issues that are involved in that. And so it's definitely on our mind a lot of the time. And my personal perspective is that, like Gary was saying, people do bad things, and I don't think that. I also believe that increased access to information and real information is going to create a better society. But there are clearly challenges when you create technologies that allow people to be completely invisible to observation.
And do you think there is any way to design it to either discourage or prevent people like terrorists or like a nefarious state actor like North Korea from using your technology?
Well, I guess my question back would be, what's the middle ground? Like, who do we trust? 2008 showed that we can't really trust banks. And we've not been able to trust corporations. We've seen that recently. And most of us believe we can't trust the government. So who is the trusted third party that we anoint with the right to own our keys and own our data? So that it's hard to find that middle ground.
So do any of you have any thoughts around that? I mean, is it just sort of like, oh, well, like we're going to design this as we feel like, and if they use it, they use it, or?
I think about what you said, it's the crux of the matter, right? Trust. The whole technology is basically about trust, and how do you create trust at scale? With people we don't know, billions of people we don't know, and B, given what we do know about human nature, and like the prisoner's dilemma and all the other things we know about human nature, and things we don't yet know about human nature, which is, how do we behave in situations of scarcity? How do we behave in situations of uncertainty? How do we behave in situations of perceived threat, real threat, perceived threat? And so often you'll hear that blockchain is called the truth machine. And the reason that it's called the truth machine, one of the reasons, is that all of the data, let's say transactions, that are stored on it cannot be tampered with. You can't go back to the email and change the text in the forwarded history in the bottom of the email. It's locked into what's called a block. And in order to make a change in a block, you would need over half of the network to agree with you, collude with you on making that change. And so I think the idea behind trust is, again, a human and an ethical idea. It's a question also of faith, and then it's a question combination of design and engineering and math, and how much kind of systemic thinking can we put into aligning ourselves with the best possible outcomes the most times. And it doesn't mean there won't be abuses, right? But when folks ask me about terrorists using cryptocurrencies, I think of terrorists using cash, and terrorists using all the other things that terrorists use, and I think, how do we prevent terror from wanting to be enacted on others, right? What's the underlying, what's the root cause? Maybe we can't solve those causes, maybe we can try, but that choking off the crypto supply chain or the cash supply chain hasn't really prevented terrorism to date, and there's no reason to think that it will prevent it moving forward.
I would also point out that there's a big difference between dragnet mass surveillance and endpoint surveillance. So for hundreds of years, we've had ways to for like law enforcement to get a warrant or to be able to collect information on individuals and to enforce the law. And we have those many tools available to us today. A lot of these tools that help improve and increase privacy, they are looking to really change the landscape so that you don't have a situation where billions of people can be spied on at the same time. But there are very, it's important that we focus more on enforcing law and preventing bad actors from being able to harm people through the use of the very useful and traditional law enforcement tools that we've used for a long time.
So we've kind of talked about the pitfalls of this technology, but I just want to paint a picture, because we sort of got it piecemeal a little bit through your speeches, but if kind of all of our ideals about how this technology might become developed come to fruition, then what could our world look like someday? What would happen to the WeChats of the world, or to the Facebook Cambridge Analytica type situations, or the Equifax hack? What would a person's everyday life look like?
So if you ask me, and what Bancor focuses on is allowing anyone to create a viable currency. We don't design the currencies, we designed our own currency, but we design the tools that will let others create currencies in their vision. So we threw out a few examples, but a Burning Man currency might reward the huggers or the gatekeepers or the garbage collectors, and a teacher's currency might reward in different ways. So our vision is that the people themselves can gather around networks of value as they see value in their vision. And so to me, what that says in a very practical sense is in terms of the labor force, folks will be able to live and make a living doing what they're passionate about doing what they're called to do. I think we all know so many people, whether directly or indirectly, that work for money, don't like their jobs, maybe even hate their jobs, maybe even don't believe in the thing that their company or their organization is doing, but they do it because we need the money. I think that we can flip this entire system on its head and have the money flow to the things we are actually called to do. And if that thing doesn't exist out there already as a job that you can get, then it's a job that you can make. And if it's creating value for people, it will create value for you. So to me, what it looks like is more poets, more artists, more joy in our work, more people over profits, and finding ourselves less in this existential dilemma that I think we're all in, and especially in a lot of the work that folks here do, which is choosing between what is right and what is profitable, what is right and what is practical. I think the world where value creation can come from anywhere in society is a world where the thing that you're passionate about is also practical, and it's practical to be human.
I see it as before we started Orchid, I used to have this sort of dinner party conversation with people, and I'd say, hey, you know that you've had these issues of surveillance. You have this issues of you're using the wrong app, using the wrong messaging app. They're watching you. And even today, when I light up my phone or turn on my computer, I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm going to use this VPN app, or I'm going to use this thing, and am I sure that I'm not being surveilled? And I just assume I am at this point. I think. People would say, well, I can't do all these really complicated steps you're telling me to do. Why can't I just press a button and it just works? And so I'd like to see a future where you just press a button, or you don't even think about pressing a button. You just know that you're not being watched, you're not being censored. That, large parts of the world where that is a reality for people, we're very lucky in most parts of the world that we visit and live in, that, yeah, sure, there's some companies monitoring things and we have some intense government surveillance, but we're not like directly under threat every single day for the things that we do online. Because most of us just, aren't doing anything that's illegal or sketchy or whatever, but it just changes one law in the country, it changes one move from political landscape from one extreme to another for that to change. And then the things that you like to do, or, imagine, the legislation around marijuana in the US right now. There's certain areas where it's okay, there's certain areas it's not. So you're going online and searching for that, maybe you're breaking the law, maybe you're not. Maybe they go back in time and say, oh, hey, we just changed the rules and you were breaking the law back then. So I think that, being able to express yourself, to express freedom, to search for information, to communicate freely, that's the kind of world I'd like to see us move to.
And you just sort of glossed over, you said in the beginning that you assume that you're being surveilled at this point. Why did you say that?
It's just a good assumption to have.
I mean, well, you live in the US,
I've been blockchain for 5 years. I run an anti-surveillance technology company. So.
And so, do you
I have multiple
worry-
phones.
Do you worry about the US government? Here, I think the way that the panel was posed, blockchain versus the surveillance state, most people are not thinking of the US, but what is your take on that?
It's one of the reasons why we based our company in the US, is in order to not be scared of the US government. Because I believe that despite the criticisms, it's one of the places that actually upholds the idea in the Constitution of freedom of expression and privacy. So we have certain extremes of politics happening there right now. But like I said, unlike my home country, which has no Bill of Rights, so we don't even know what Guantanamo Bay is in the UK because people just disappear. So there's a strong differentiation there, and I think that we need to encode more of these ideas into code, as you've been saying, not just law, so that we can enforce them in different ways. But I think that I'm less scared about the US government than I am about other governments.
So
I think one really big trend for the future that we should aspire towards is one where we can move from a world where we don't really have a choice, a good choice profile. Right now we either use Facebook and all these other applications that have these massive drawbacks, or we don't. And I think through a lot of these decentralizing technologies, through competition, and we can get to a world where we can choose exactly the software that we want to use, and this results in all of these other derivative benefits. We can be very conscious about how our data is used. We can be very conscious about the exact features of the applications. You're talking about the Cambridge Analytica situation, and I gave a talk last year, March of last year, about Cambridge Analytica at a time when everyone's like, "What are you talking about? That sounds crazy." But it's been something that we've it has been flying under the radar for a while. I think in the Cambridge Analytica situation specifically, I would attribute perhaps the biggest risk there due to the fact that there was a monoculture in terms of the software that we use. There was one single social network with billions of people that had a single algorithm that was governing the feeds of these billions of people. And it was something that was able to be exploited. Whenever you have rules, those rules are going to be exploited by those who are the most sophisticated. And if, however, we had a decentralized social network with many different clients and many different pieces of software, that the extent of that wouldn't have been able to happen. And you would have had different developers and different teams making different decisions. So I think we need to move to a world like that, as opposed to a world where a blight could spread across all of the crops in a country and just devastate the population. The same thing can't happen in the digital world.
Okay, so we've literally got 1 minute left for this panel. And I just want to frame this question because at the beginning of the internet, everybody thought that, oh, here we have this technology, it'll enable people to communicate peer-to-peer. And instead now we've got, Facebook, Twitter, Google, all managing our communications. So as we move forward into this world of blockchain and crypto assets developing, what do you hope is kind of the key design principle, I guess you could say, that the different projects use to ensure that we don't end up in the same situation where 20 years down the line we have the crypto version of Cambridge Analytica or WeChat?
I'd say that it's kind of incumbent upon the entrepreneurs and the investors to think about how to build a decentralized set of companies. So often people ask me, what's the Facebook of blockchain? And I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. So we actually have the capability to build an ecosystem of lots of companies, none of which is trying to take over the other one, but actually wants to cooperate and have innovation happening in different places. And I think that's a much more vibrant ecosystem, and I believe that's part of the mission of people who are in this industry.
So the core principle is decentralization.
Exactly.
Okay.
Collaboration.
Tweetable.
Yeah.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. I think if we can build systems where the outcome is that we're all doing well, that is collaboration, right? When you have a zero-sum game the way we have in our finance today, and so the way we have in our corporations, any other company's success is a threat to you, right? This is why Facebook buys WhatsApp, buys Instagram. Anything that is doing well, you need to either own or crush or copy. In the blockchain industry, at least so far, we have a very different kind of ethos, and the technology also lends itself to a very different manifestation because of open source, because of forking. You can take anything you see, copy, paste it, make a change, and if people want to run with you, they can. And so everything we know about IP, about patents, about private property, personal property in the realm of corporate products is changing. And I'll just give a quick example. Bancor and Tezos as well, we are foundations. We are not-for-profit foundations that minted currencies, collected currency, and now are growing our ecosystems. The mandate on our foundations is not profit. It's not to make a profit. It's not to charge the users. I get asked all the time, oh, do you take a fee on every transaction? No, absolutely not. It's a not-for-profit foundation. It doesn't exist to create profit. That said, if it grows and if the network is adopted and if people use it, the value of this currency increases. So there still is profit to be made and profit centers to be built on the infrastructure and in the ecosystem, but profit is not the mandate of the foundation. It's adoption and growth.
Okay, we have 10 seconds. So,
Gonna be just,
Yeah.
To be a pessimist, I think it's really, really hard, and we don't, and no one today knows exactly how to do this really well because it's fairly new. The main difficulty is that centralization is generally more efficient. And there's a tendency in society to push towards the middle of the distribution, towards efficiency in the common case at the cost of having very high cost failure in the tails. And it's really, really hard to push against that trend. Once you have something that works, you'll have centralized version of it, and they work slightly better. And so unless the people using it actually directly, explicitly care about decentralization, it can make it very, very difficult. It doesn't mean it's not worth trying. One of the things we're doing in Tezos, for instance, is that instead of having this model where, well, there's a network that people are using, and then there's like a development team that works on the network that curates it and do all of these tasks. One of the ambition of Tezos is to have self-governance, which means that the people who are participating in the network and using it are directly making the decisions that impact the future of the network. And so I think the way that you make people care about decentralization is you have to appeal to something other than just efficiency. You have to appeal to something a little more like, a little bit like a sense of belonging, a sense of community. I think that's possibly the key that is going to make people care about decentralization. They'll use this because they're part of this community, as opposed to a corporation, for example, or a centralized product that don't give them the same sense of belonging.
Okay, I think that's a great point to wrap up on. It's not just in the hands of the designers, but also the users. You can choose to use kind of like a graphite rather than Google Docs or whatever. So, be thinking about decentralization. One last note is that if you are interested in these topics that we discussed, I discuss them a lot more in depth on my 2 podcasts. One is called Unchained and the other is called Unconfirmed. You should definitely check them out. And otherwise, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.